Today's guest on the Life and a Living podcast is Lindsay McGregor. Now, Lindsay is a founder of an organization called the Vega Factor, which is focused on building high-performing adaptive cultures in organizations on a global basis. And Lindsay is a really, really fascinating lady. She's also the author of the book Primed to Perform, which has been a bestseller for a number of years. Cover a wide range of topics, but a couple of things that I think you really will get out of it is to how to get the right rhythm into your management and leadership right now during this COVID-19, which has been very disruptive, and some people have reacted in a way that is not always helpful to their people, where they're beginning to micromanage, which is causing people to feel disengaged, but is also causing people to feel that they're not quite trusted. So I think that she talks very eloquently about that, and I think there's a lot she has to say about that that are really helpful. The second area is to really understand that there's a science to motivation. It's not just the rah-rah stuff. There is a real science to it. And she talks about, how, kind of play, potential, and purpose play into, growing that motivation. ToMo, as she calls it, which is total motivation. And the third area, which I think is really interesting, is that when we look at culture, and we all talk about we want to improve culture, and we recognize, as I said in the interview, it's not just about the ping pong table and the bean bags, but that there really are tools that you need to have in your kit bag as you go about changing the culture or growing the culture and improving the culture. So I think there's an awful lot, there's a lot more besides. So there's a huge amount to be learned with this interview with Lindsay, and I would encourage you to tune in and listen to it and take plenty of notes. If you want to get other good interviews, there are some great guests that I've had on the show, and you can go to the site and find those. But in the meantime, sit back and enjoy this conversation with Lindsay McGregor. Lindsay, thank you so much indeed for taking the time out to share your knowledge, your expertise, and all of that you bring to a podcast. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, John. Really excited to be here.
It's great. I noticed that you talk about it, because I want to talk about the book that you have behind you and what that's all about. But I noticed that on your website, and if I can just read out to you, say that we need, at this moment in time, with everything that is going on in the world of COVID and the challenges that it's facing, it's bringing to us, is that we need to, and I hope I'm going to get this right, driving tight rhythms of prioritization, alignment, problem solving, and execution. And secondly, was keeping a pulse on the motivational and emotional well-being of our colleagues. Can I talk about the first? What do you mean by that is different in this time as opposed to what we would euphemistically call normal times?
Yeah, it's been really fascinating to see how teams and leaders initially reacted to the COVID-19 crisis. For businesses that were lucky enough to still be open and working, there were really two divergent paths. Some teams would feel like they were in complete chaos, and their leader said, go home, take care of what you need to go home, and call me if there's an emergency. And people in that scenario actually felt like they were really out at sea, like they were lost, they weren't sure what they were supposed to be doing, it was unclear what success looked like, and it was really, really surprisingly unsettling to their leaders found out later. The second group of people found that their organizations in crisis mode really doubled down on all the tactical parts of their job. So they made all their process lists really rigid and all their policies really rigid, and everything became about checking the boxes and following the rules and new layers of accountability and sign-offs. And suddenly the senior leaders are joining meetings that they never used to join to micromanage everything. And those organizations were really found that didn't enhance performance, and it was really demotivating to their people. So what's been really critical to any business always, but even more during a crisis, has been how do you balance that tactical and adaptive component of the work and set up routines and rhythms where those two exist in harmony, which is really hard to do.
And when you talk about setting out rhythms to get them in harmony, what do you mean by that, and what would that actually look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So every team has a unique circumstance, but what a vanilla flavor typically looks like for a team is most teams will have a Monday team meeting, right, where they'll go through our plan for the week. And in some organizations, that team meeting becomes a list of tasks. One of the clients that we work with refers to it as they pull up a spreadsheet with all the tasks that they're doing. They have the name of the person who owns every single task. And then it's red, green, yellow, right? Whether it's on track or not. And they call it a watermelon meeting because everything is green on the outside, but red on the inside, right? The meeting is everything seems to be okay, but everybody knows if they just dug a little bit deeper, it's all a big problem. So in that Monday morning watermelon meeting, what most teams will do is focus on the tasks and the tactics. And what's really critical about that plan for the week is you start by thinking not only what are the tasks that we have to get done, but what are the problems that we don't have an answer to that we need to solve? Like, where do we need to adapt? Where is the moment where we could approach something a different way, experiment with how we work, find an opportunity to delight a customer in a way we never have? Start with what are those big problems that we as a team don't have the answer to, and what are the experiments that we're going to run this week so that at the end of this week, we are a stronger, more impactful team than we were at the beginning of the week. Let's not just do business as usual. So then you've got your plan for the week that's got both the tactical and the adaptive components to it. Throughout the week, you're doing problem solvings in small groups or one-on-ones with a manager to talk through, to really problem solve together, right? When we've measured about 20,000 people around the world and what motivates them. And when you're working on a project or a piece of work that's a slight stretch for your skill level, that's the most motivating. So that means that you need that collaboration throughout the week with others who can help you because you're pushing yourself a little bit. You're not tackling something that you could just do easily on your own. And then at the end of the week on a Friday, let's say your team is coming together and you're really celebrating what you've learned. So we're doing we call these Friday reflections. Some people call them demos or retros, but more of a rhythm of you're sharing what did we learn this week? What impact did we have this week? And what do we want to learn next week? So that you're really incorporating into your organization the sense that we're not here to just complete a set of tasks. We're here to get better at what we do every single day.
And is that the basis for the kind of and I may have this titled the wrong way, but the kind of the open software that you have for Reflect? Is that kind of what's behind that? Because I know that you offer that to people and people can go in and put in their data. Is that the genesis behind that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we first started to study what motivates people, we found that the teams that are really proactive in managing their plan for the week and their motivation over the week are much higher performing and more motivated. So we created a tool that we call Reflect that people can use on a weekly basis to measure how their team is feeling that week, what's motivating them that week, and what's bringing their motivation down that week, and also create a plan for what they want to do in the week ahead regarding their work and regarding their motivation. So that they've got those experiments every single week and can create that rhythm for themselves. It's really powerful because it's often, so much goes unsaid that just having a routine and a rhythm and a moment to talk about things that are often difficult to talk about goes a long way.
Actually, to come back to what you were saying there earlier on, that, people tend to, what's happening now is people are kind of going right down into the weeds, and it's about the nuts and bolts and the grains of sand and all of that. And it's interesting you say that, because one of the things that has come up in my work when coaching with my clients is that, and the feedback that I've got from some of the people reporting to the managers that I'm coaching, is that they're getting down into very granular detail, and what it's doing is actually making their people feel that they're not trusted, because it seems to be that it's almost checking in with them. Are you, because I can't see you, because maybe I'm used to kind of seeing you out on the floor outside my office, but now I can't see you. So I'm I'm now just checking to see if you're actually working. Is that something that you're coming across?
Yes, absolutely. A huge, huge refrain is, I don't feel trusted anymore because of all the micromanagement.
Yeah.
But the flip side is that often in many organizations, the leaders have a lot more context and experience than the teams at the front lines. And so the big question is, how do you create an organization where the teams can tap into the experience of the senior leaders and get the best of what they know and all their insights, their problem solving, their expertise in a way that motivates them rather than feels like a lack of trust. So for that, for example, in one pharmaceutical company that we were working with, they have a big clinical trials department where they're working with hospitals to make sure that the clinical trials of their drugs operate or are set up and operate smoothly, and are, it's hugely it's a hugely complex work because they're working with dozens of hospitals around the country and dozens of doctors and medical teams, and there's lots of complexity. And when COVID-19 hit, of course, the hospitals are focused on how do we handle COVID-19, not how do we, keep these medical trials on track. And so every single team started with, okay, what are the big questions or the big problems that our team needs to tackle, right? So for one of them, it's how do we keep our patients safe when they're going into the hospital? The next question is, how do we answer questions that are coming in from this department at the hospital that have never come in before? The third one was really tactical. How do we work remote? How do we help each other work remotely, especially when some of us have kids at home and we can't work regular schedules? Like, what do we need to do internally to just work better? And what their leaders were able to do was look at what are those big questions or the big problems that each team is able to tackle and throw in some ideas. But the team, they weren't handing the team a task list. As the executive looked at the team, they would say, okay, a bunch of the teams had great questions. They were exactly what they needed to tackle. They were right on point. But some of the teams actually had questions that I would not have expected them to need to focus on right now. I would have said, these are not the three most important things we could do this month for our patients and our hospitals. And so that's a really important sign that the team might be missing context or data or information. This is a good moment for me to go in and help chat to the team, talk to the team, and share my perspectives and my views. So it's much more of a let me go and help that team rather than let me go and become a command and control leader with that team. And so the more that you can set up a system where your executives do have visibility into what challenges are you tackling and what ideas do you have to tackle them, the more you'll get the best thinking of an executive without moving into a micromanagement watermelon meeting.
Yeah, okay. Can I shift to your book, Prior to Performance? You've got it behind you, but I also happen to have one here. I'm being honest, totally honest. I haven't read it because I just got it delivered by Amazon, but I'm looking forward to reading it. But I know, and I want to get into the whole thing of ToMo, and you can explain what that is. But I heard you giving a talk, and you were talking about performance, and you were defining what performance is, because performance is one of these kind of words that we throw around a little bit, and my interpretation of performance and your interpretation of performance can be quite different. And sometimes I said, well, if I'm being brought in an organization, well, I want to improve the performance of the team, or I want to improve the performance of an individual. You kind of say, okay, well, what do you actually mean by that? So when you talk about performance, what are you actually talking about?
Yeah, great question. So originally, when we were doing research into what creates the highest levels of performance for a team, we had a list of probably 100 things that we meant by performance, right? It meant that your sales numbers are good and your NPS numbers are good and your efficiency numbers are good, but it also meant that your team was gritty and creative and ethical and all of these really soft things that are really hard to measure. And after lots of sort of spinning on this and trying to make sense of it, we realized that we were really talking about things that could boil up into two categories. The first was tactical performance, and the second was adaptive performance. So the tactical is all of the ways that you're creating consistency and scale. It's all the things that create where you've got to-do lists and process maps, and you need people to follow the same types of routines or do the same things in order for your organization to be impactful, right? If you walk into a Starbucks in France or a Starbucks in New York and you order, your cappuccino, you would expect your cappuccino to taste like a Starbucks cappuccino. How you make a drink at Starbucks is 100% tactical. The drink has to taste the same, right? From store to store. But the tactical piece is only half of it, and the other half is the adaptive. And this is how well you're being creative and problem solving and reacting to the unique situations you're in. That's why, for example, if you go into a Starbucks, the way that some of the Starbucks, you can really feel the culture of the place. You walk in and the baristas are greeting you and saying hello and commenting on, making you feel special as a unique individual person. There's tons of adaptive performance in the customer service of what Starbucks delivers. And we realize that great organizations are thinking about how do we have great tactical and great adaptive. So the great tactical is, let's take my favorite way of thinking about this, which we sort of came to after publishing Proactive Reform. So it's not in the book, was that tactical performance is essentially how well your organization has learned from the past, right? Have you taken all your past knowledge and learnings and codified them so that you hire a new person and they can be performing, they can take all those past lessons and use them within just a few months? And and you're never making the same mistake twice, right? And then adaptive performance is how well you're learning for the future. Are you constantly experimenting, innovating, creating new knowledge? And if you can get both of those right, it's really powerful. But the real trick is that, as you can imagine, one destroys the other, right? If you double down on the tactical so much, if you start pounding people about the metrics and the policies and the rules, people will start to forget and not do the adaptive. And if you let everything be adaptive, people won't spend any time on the tactical. And so the key for a leader is how to identify where I need which one and how do I keep those two in balance.
So when you look at the tactical, and let me just play this back. So the tactical, what I hear, this is the processes, the structures, the way we do things, blah, 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 all of that. So it's very, it's captured, it's detailed, it's articulated, it's very, very clear. There's not much ambiguity about it. The adaptive is more about the kind of the culture and the way we do things. But how prescriptive is the adaptive? I mean, is the adaptive as prescriptive as the tactical, except it's just different?
It's a great question. A startup that we were working with, a big tech unicorn, right? They've probably 5 years old. 5 years ago, they were super adaptive because it was 12 people in a room, right? And so they were constantly able to experiment and innovate. But by the time they got up to about 300 people, they said their adaptive performance had completely crumbled because nobody knew how to get anything done. So if you had an idea for an experiment or a new initiative, you didn't know who to go talk to. You felt like, okay, I have to get like 299 other people to agree with me before I can change anything.
Right.
Like, this is a nightmare. So it's really interesting that even, to your question, even to get adaptive performance, when you're a larger organization, you have to have some process in place to make it easy to get stakeholder alignment, to bring in experts from the different departments that you work with, to make sure that the experiments that you're doing really make sense for your organization. Now, of course, there's easy experiments that any individual can do, like how do I greet a customer with no consensus required. But once you start to do bigger experiments that have a bigger impact on your customer and your product, that you do need a process in place where you're getting stakeholder input and you're sharing your ideas and getting consensus on them so that you can move fast as an organization.
Okay, but it is that challenge to keep the adaptive fresh, isn't it?
Exactly. Exactly. Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
For example, one big customer service department we were working with, their adaptive performance was about probably 30 big projects a year that their customer service representatives would launch. So for example, let's test these new features in our CRM tool. Let's try this new email template. You know, they had big projects, but when they were trying to understand how do I really get great adaptive performance and great motivation in my team, they found that it wasn't just the big project that you got to participate in once a year. It actually shifted to where with their 200 people, they were running 200 micro experiments every single week, right? What is the small, tiny experiment that I can run in the work I'm already doing, right? So for example, in the phone call I'm about to do, let me test a new way of explaining our product. Or in this phone call, in my emails, let me explain this new way of using macros to make writing the email easier. What are those small adaptive moments that every person can do, as well as what are the bigger initiatives or experiments that my company's doing?
Yeah, interesting. Can I move on to the ToMo and total motivation? And I loved what Adam Grant, as an author, I would have a lot of time for, the author of Give and Take. He said that what you've done with the work you've done is to bring a fresh, ambitious look at the science and the practice of motivation, which I thought, you know, for somebody from like Adam Grant, that was quite a testimonial. But when you're looking, you refer to as ToMo, and it's got the three parts of play, purpose, and potential. Can you just elaborate on that, how you got to it, and maybe what those component parts, how they play to actually deliver the total motivation?
Yeah, absolutely. We were testing dozens of different theories from psychology and business best practice on thousands of people around the world to understand, did what work in a laboratory or in a small group setting work at the scale of a Fortune 500 organization? Right? And we found, after lots and lots of dead ends, that we could build on a field of psychology called self-determination theory, which boils down very, very simply to this idea that why you work determines how well you work. So your reason for doing something is going to change what you do when you get there. And there are 6 reasons why people do anything. The first 3 are play and purpose and potential. They're all connected to the work itself. So if you're, for example, an engineer and you're working because of play, it's you just love the puzzle and the problem solving of the work. The work itself is its own reward. Purpose is you see your impact. Not necessarily that you've got a big giant mission, right? We're working with lots of companies where the mission is, you know, change my industry for good. It's actually not that. It's, do you feel like if you don't show up today, something you care about is not going to happen? Like you feel how you matter. And potential is you feel like there's some second order impact to your work that you care about. Usually I'm learning, I'm developing, I'm growing. And if you've got play, purpose, and potential, you're much more likely to adapt. But there's 3 motives that you mentioned that destroy adaptive performance: emotional pressure, economic pressure, and inertia. So emotional pressure is the anxiety, guilt, fear, the embarrassment. You know, it's why you're going to a big presentation with the board of your company and you've given this presentation so many times to your peers, and suddenly you get into the board meeting and you crumble, right? That's emotional pressure. We have lots of words for it in English, right? Where writers get writer's block, athletes choke, you know, we all know this.
It's the old self-sabotage, isn't it? It is the old self-sabotage.
It is. It's so painful because you know you're better than that. Yeah. The economic pressure is when you feel like you're doing something because of a reward or a punishment. Like the only reason I'm doing this is because I need that bonus or I need that promotion. Otherwise, I know it doesn't make sense. And the inertia is when you're doing something just because you've always done it, right? Like if somebody asks you why are you still in that job, and you're like, it's just what I've always done. And what was so interesting to us about these motives is that you could use any of them to get tactical performance, but the only way you could get both tactical and adaptive was to amp up the good ones, play, purpose, potential, and really minimize emotional pressure, economic pressure, and inertia. And that's what we talk about as a state of total motivation, or ToMo for short, where you've got lots of play, purpose, potential, and very little emotional pressure, economic pressure, and inertia. And what was so interesting is that you could measure those motives with 6 simple survey questions at, international airlines and pharmaceutical companies and restaurants and grocery stores, and you could actually see the impact of the motivation levels on customer service. You could go in and change the motivation and increase sales compared to control groups. It was finally a way of measuring engagement or motivation that you could build a business case around. So you could go to your board and not just say culture is the good thing to do or the moral thing to do or the thing we need to do for recruiting. You could say it's worth, this small investment that we made in our culture, is worth $10 million a year per every 100 people, which is a game changer for a lot of leaders to make something soft and fluffy into something quantitative.
Yeah. Because I think, let's be honest about it. If you're talking to the CEO of any business, irrespective of kind of where they're coming from, yes, they will. Everyone will say culture is really important because, nobody's going to say it's not, right? Because you kind of really can't say that, because it doesn't sound terribly good. But you really get somebody's attention that if you can demonstrate, and I do believe that there is that direct correlation between the positive culture and the bottom line results of an organization. And I think it's the same for issues like diversity and inclusion, when you can actually tag those to a bottom line result. And again, you can do that. That's where it begins to kind of step away from being kind of a nice to have to a need to have. But when you actually take all of that into consideration, why is it that we have so few organizations that have got a great culture?
It's a great question. It's something that very, very few of us ever have been exposed to a science-based approach. So it's a little bit like all of us have been flying blind for a long, long time. There are few leaders there's leaders who intuitively get this. And in fact, many of the best leaders that I've met in my life intuitively lead with play, purpose, and potential. But without the data to confirm that really is effective, they often operate that way 60% of the time or 70% of the time, and not always 100. So some do 100. And for the rest of us, we're sort of figuring it out. And without the data and the science on how to behave personally as a leader, how to motivate one-on-one, it's even a whole nother level of challenge than how do you motivate at the level of an entire organization, because no matter how much you motivate one-on-one, once your organization gets big, you start to build systems that have motivational impact above and beyond any individual. So I've worked with, incredibly talented, highly motivating individuals who work in a system where their performance management system, for example, puts them in competition with one another. It doesn't matter how much play and purpose they have for the customer impact. At the end of the day, if they know their neighbor is going to get promoted, one neighbor is going to get promoted and one neighbor is going to get fired, your play and purpose is going to start to go down. It's the same thing with, organization structures that create silos, destroy your motivation. Your team routines, if you can't get anything done, destroy motivation. So people have looked at all of these systems in a company from a cost perspective, but we haven't to date had the science to look at them from a motivational perspective as well, to see, are these systems in our company driving up motivation, and are they maximizing both the tactical and the adaptive performance of the company? And so as a result of that analysis, a lot of organizations will say, okay, we've actually built these systems to drive tactical only. We need to build them to drive both tactical and adaptive and be much more motivating to our people.
Yeah. And, again, working with organizations, you hear, people say, okay, well, we really need to do something about the culture in this organization, which is kind of one of those lovely things to say. And then you kind of go, okay, so how are we actually going to go about doing that? And what do we actually define as being culture? But leaving that aside, there's probably a subject for another interview. But what are if you are going about changing the culture in an organization, what are the tools that you need to have in your kit bag in order to do that?
Great question. First is data. almost every organization that we work with has people who intuitively get the science and say, yes, this is what I've been looking for my whole life. I understand great cultures, and people who say this is a waste of time. And so the more that you can get data on your own, measure your own motivation, measure the current state of your culture, and that's a huge starting point. Second, if you can then build a business case around it, so you take a group within your people and really focus on how do I get tactical and adaptive and motivation in this group, and then measure the performance of this group, whether it's a sales group or a customer service group against the other groups in our organization. If you've got that business case, it becomes really unassailable. In some organizations, you don't have hard metrics that are that easy, but your organization will still see the degree of problem solving, creativity, and energy coming from one group that just outshines the other. So that's the first piece. The second piece in your toolkit is to give people a common understanding of the science. So play, purpose, potential works across every country, every culture, but how it shows up in every company is unique, right? Like, what is play for an MIT engineer is not the same thing as what is play for a Southwest Airlines flight attendant, or play for somebody who loves operational problem solving in the back office of an airline, right? So you've got to figure out what is the play, purpose, potential that our company stands for, and help really shape that narrative in a way that's based on the science, but truly unique to you. And when you get that right, you really start to win hearts and minds. In one organization, for example, they shared the science of motivation with thousands of their leaders. And by giving their leaders a really common language and a common vision of what play, purpose, potential means here, they were suddenly able to course correct every time the organization started to accidentally do things in a really demotivating, tactical only way. And it made it safe to talk about the type of company we want to be and where we want to get to go. So one is measurement and case study. Two is common understanding and language. And then three is, in your toolkit, is to really work on not just the things that are extraneous to your work, but a good way to put it is, if you want to make work engaging, you have to make the work engaging. You have to look at, not am I making people happy in the break room and the coffee shop and the company party, which is less of a temptation these days, but am I actually making the work itself interesting? Am I letting people experiment, innovate, problem solve? Because if you start there, if you start by problem solving how the work gets done, you will get at the core of the problem rather than the extraneous distractions.
Okay. So just the ping pong table and the bean bags are not enough.
No, unfortunately.
Lindsay,
I wish it were. Life would be much simpler.
Yeah, but there mightn't be as much scope for the sort of work that you're doing if it was that easy as well. Lindsay, this has been fantastic. It really has. I've kept you way longer than I said I would, so my apologies for that, but I'm delighted that you stayed with us. It has been fantastic. But before we wrap up, and you can tell people where they can get in touch with you, 2 questions I ask everybody. A book that's had an impact upon them other than your own?
My favorite is Liz Wiseman's Multipliers. It's so powerful for how do you combat how do you bring out the best in everyone around you.
That's a great book, actually. Yeah, I agree with you. And daily rituals, if you have any, and what they do for you.
My favorite is going for a walk with a colleague to talk about a problem that some sort of problem that we're trying to solve at work. And suddenly when you're outside with the trees around you, ideas come to you that would have never come in an office. So it's that daily walk that really keeps me going.
So far better than sitting in a stuffy room anyway, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
And it gets the creative juices going. Lindsay, thank you so much. Where can people get in touch with you? Because I know that I know your website. I know there's a ton of good resources in there, but where can they get in touch with you?
Thank you so much. Yes, our website is primetoperform.com. They're welcome to write in there, and I'm happy to respond with contact information. There's also on primetoperform.com the ability to measure your motivation and your team's motivation, and you'll get back an anonymous report. that you can use in your team meeting. So please, happy to have people to reach out with questions and make myself available for people really trying to help their teams through this time.
Lindsay, we'll have all of that in the show notes, and I'm sure people will reach out because the work you do is phenomenal. The quality of the work you do is absolutely amazing, and I really do applaud you. And I do thank you again for coming on the show.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to share the research. It's really a pleasure to be here.